fairly old video that I did about a year ago. I used the poetic metaphor, if you will, about the Aquarian waters of the spirit blasting in. I used the metaphor of a splash when referring to the Aquarian waters of spirit pouring onto the world. When this happens, there's going to be a splash, which is to say there's a mess. When we spill something where there's a splash, things get wet, and there is a mess which must be cleaned up. It is a bit of a traumatic process, if you will. And for whatever reason, I was meditating on that recently, and I wanted to expound on it a little bit in light of the current circumstances. If we were to look at a map of the United States currently, it might resemble one side being ice and the other side being fire. This is I'm not the first person to point this out by any stretch. At the same time, we've just heard of a horrible crash near the nation's capital. And we must bear in mind something that we don't always bear in mind, which is that things don't happen by chance. And if such an event, and we know that accidents happen, but when certain large events happen on certain places at certain times in the calendar, we must clue in and remember that these things don't always just happen by chance. I do not think this was an accident that happened at all. I do not think it was an accident. Most such events in our history are not, particularly when they make their way into the so-called mainstream media. There is some sort of contrivance going on, some sort of orchestration with some other purpose, some other deeper purpose. It is no newsflash from anyone that there has been and is and will be chaos and chaotic events in the world. And if we look at the issue with the 3 outer planets moving signs over the next year, this is a subject I keep coming back to. Huge. Pluto already having made its move. Neptune and Uranus to be making their moves over the next year to year and a half, with their retrograde cycles finally in a year and a half's time, both being one sign over, putting all 3 outer planets into masculine signs. Air and fire are masculine signs. Gemini, Aries, Aquarius, 2 air and 1 fire, 3 masculine. And creating quite a nifty triangle of their own, which is going to be a supercharging, overpowering energy in the world for a while, when you consider how slowly these wandering stars, the outermost wandering stars move. This masculine air-fire triangle, which will be affecting the world, is something to meditate upon. Anyone interested in this language, I don't want to tell you what it is. I don't know what it is. All I know is that, considering the splash, the metaphor of the splash, the waters of spirit pouring onto a barren earth, if you will, symbolically a world that is spiritually barren, compared to the flooding of the spiritual waters of the Aquarian man. That energy, compared to that energy, we are barren. And when that water were to hit that barren land, there would be a huge splash, and there would be a ricochet of water and a huge mess, and that's what we have. And therefore, since we're dealing with Aquarius and we're dealing with mental, as is to say, we're dealing with communication, information, thought, activity, conversation, definition, language, technology, we must put into that splashy framework all that is happening in the current events of the world, and we consider how strange some of them are. This recent plane crash that happened, sadly enough, ended with a splash in the water. Literally. And tragically, it is understood that there were no survivors. All of them went splashing in to the water and didn't come out. And many more than likely may have been killed in the explosion. And right in Washington, D.C., in the area of the nation's capital, there was a big splash and a big mess. And that's what we have. And it's a tragic one. A tragic one. Doesn't get much more symbolic than that. We must take everything with a grain of salt. I also said in an earlier talk that one of the ways that the Aquarian age is going to manifest itself in our thinking, in our understanding, in our perception, will be that things that come to us in realms that are normally the truth will come to us as a lie. And things in the world and aspects of our understanding and perception will be coming to us that normally come to us as a lie will be coming to us as the truth. There will be a lot of floppy going on in the mental realm of things as these three outer planets make their way into the masculine signs over the next year. No doubt about it. When there is great change, there is always great loss. When there is great change, there is great loss. Many people in my nation are wondering right now what they voted for or what they didn't vote for, if they are of the voting type. This should be nothing new to anyone who maintains a big picture perspective. We see the plane and the bird, the dinosaur vulture, banking to the left for 8 years, banking to the right, banking to the left, banking to the right. And all it did recently was just did a quicker bank and went like that. That was the part we weren't used to. But it's the same bird banking to the left and banking to the right. And notice that I'm using the word bank because it is the bank that decides whether it's going to go to the left or the right from the surface theater of the political game that is way less real than we think it is, in the way that we think it is. No doubt about that. Part of the Aquarian waters of spirit pouring onto the barren spiritual land of Earth and the modern world is going to be showing us that. Part of that revelation is going to be showing us how fake so many things really are, and how dishonest so many things in our realm, in our understanding, in our perception, and in our conditioned world are. The splash of the Aquaman's pitcher onto the cracked, barren, dry land will create earthquakes and fires and floods and all manner of crashes, which is exactly what we are seeing manifesting physically. Unbelievable. Let's be realistic. If we wanted to deport 15 million people, even with the biggest planes that we have, it would take probably 60 years and probably $500 billion. But we haven't bothered to calculate that part. In other words, if people think that the rising prices in our food supply are a problem, which they are, they're a small problem compared to the bigger problems. One being the one I mentioned of time and money. If even there were a real attempt to do such a thing, it would take longer than most people have careers for it to happen. And on top of that, perhaps one of the goals of such an endeavor is to create a state whereby martial law could be declared at any moment if some sort of emergency or dangerous situation were to arise, which I could easily see occurring in big cities and may already be starting to happen. And in fact, starting to be stirred up, perhaps, if you will. Which is to say that so-called ordinary Americans, so-called legal citizens could be easily bound up and wrapped up in this whole thing against their will and as innocent people. And what if, in fact, this is one of the goals? Perhaps the dissidents among us are meant to be wrapped up in this so-called deportation agenda. I will leave that subject for now for you to ponder. But the whole thing is very fishy. Let us never forget the bird banking to the left and to the right. It is the same bird, the same plane. What's driving the plane? What is the bird? That is what the Aquarian waters of spirit are going to show us. It is not a president or a prime minister or any politician or any head of state or any famous person anywhere of any kind that is going to show us that and reveal that to us and explain that to us. No, it is the waters of spirit that are going to explain that to us. And right now, everything's a big blur because we're in the middle of a giant splash, literally. God bless us all. May we maintain a little patience and not jump to any conclusions at the moment.